The rancher hated outsiders, until a group of 10 beautiful Chinese women asked for shelter. But when Thaddeus Whitmore saw them approaching his fence that scorching afternoon, his first instinct wasn't curiosity. It was rage. He stood on his porch, rifle already in hand, watching the dust cloud grow larger on the horizon. 10 figures emerged from the heat shimmer, moving slowly across his land like they owned it. Women, foreign women, by the look of their clothes and the way they carried themselves. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Thaddeus had built his reputation on one simple rule: no trespassers. Ever. The last person who'd ignored his warning signs had left with a bullet in his shoulder and a promise that the next one would find his heart. That was 3 years ago, and word had spread. His land was sacred ground now, untouchable. But these women kept coming. The leader stepped forward when they reached his gate, a young woman with determined eyes and dirt-stained silk. She was beautiful. He'd give her that. But beauty meant nothing to a man who'd learned that everything pretty in this world eventually turned to ash. She raised her hands, palms open, speaking in broken English. "Please, sir, we need help. We have nowhere. Get off my land." His voice cut through her words like a blade through paper. The rifle didn't waver from his shoulder. "Now!" The woman, Li Wei, though he didn't know her name yet, took another step forward. Behind her, the other women huddled together, fear and exhaustion written across their faces. Some were barely more than girls. All of them looked like they hadn't eaten in days. "We will work," she said, her accent thick but her resolve thicker. "We cook. We clean. I said get off my land," Thaddeus roared, stepping down from the porch. The women flinched, but Li Wei held her ground. Something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, but recognition. She'd seen his kind of pain before. "They come for us," she said quietly. "Bad men. They hurt us if they find us." Thaddeus felt something twist in his chest, but he crushed it down. Other people's problems weren't his concern. Not anymore. Not since Margaret and little Emma had been torn from him by men who probably looked just as desperate as these women did now. "Should have thought of that before you came here," he said, raising the rifle higher. "You've got 10 seconds to turn around or I start shooting." But as Li Wei stared at him, something passed between them, a understanding that neither could name. She saw the wall he'd built around his heart, and for just a moment, he saw the terror she was trying so hard to hide. The sound of distant hoofbeats echoed across the plains. Someone was coming, fast. Li Wei's head snapped toward the sound, and every trace of composure vanished from her face. Pure terror replaced the determined mask she'd been wearing. The other women began to whimper and cluster together like frightened birds. "Hide us," she whispered, her broken English cracking with desperation. "Please. They kill us if they find." Thaddeus lowered his rifle slightly, confused by the sudden shift. These weren't just desperate travelers anymore. They were prey being hunted. The hoofbeats grew louder, maybe 6 riders by the sound of it, pushing their horses hard across the dry earth. "What did you do?" he demanded. "Nothing," Li Wei said, tears starting to spill down her cheeks. "We escape. From mine. From—" She struggled for words, her hands making gestures he couldn't understand. "Bad place. Men who buy us." The pieces clicked together in Thaddeus's mind like bullets sliding into a chamber. These weren't just immigrants looking for work. They were slaves who'd broken their chains, and their masters were coming to collect. One of the younger women collapsed to her knees, sobbing something in Chinese. Li Wei knelt beside her, speaking rapidly in their native tongue, but her eyes never left Thaddeus's face. She was begging without words, offering him a choice that would define what kind of man he really was. The hoofbeats were close now, maybe 2 minutes out. "The barn," he heard himself say, though he couldn't believe the words were coming from his mouth. "Take them to the barn. Stay quiet. Stay hidden." Li Wei's eyes widened with shock and gratitude, but there was no time for thanks. She barked orders to the other women in Chinese, and they scattered toward the weathered building like leaves in a windstorm, all except Li Wei, who lingered for just a moment. "Why you help us?" she asked. Thaddeus didn't have an answer, or maybe he had too many answers. All of them tangled up with memories of Margaret's last scream and Emma's tiny hand going limp in his. He'd failed to save his own family. Maybe this was his chance to fail someone else's. "Just hide," he growled. The riders crested the hill just as the barn door slammed shut. 6 men on horseback, dust-covered and mean-looking, with the kind of hard eyes that came from doing hard things for money. Their leader was a tall man with a scraggly beard and a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. "Afternoon," the man called out, reining in his horse about 20 feet from Thaddeus's porch. "Name's Crenshaw. We're looking for some property that wandered off." "Don't know what you're talking about," Thaddeus replied, keeping his rifle visible but not threatening. Yet, Crenshaw smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. 10 Chinese girls. Pretty little things. Probably came through here an hour or so ago. Asking for help. He leaned forward in his saddle. "See, they belong to us. Legal and proper. Got the papers to prove it. Haven't seen anyone. Mind if we take a look around? Just to be sure." Thaddeus felt his finger slide to the rifle's trigger. "I mind plenty." The silence stretched between them like a rope about to snap. 5 of Crenshaw's men had their hands resting on their gun belts, but something in Thaddeus's stance, the way he held himself like a man with nothing left to lose, made them hesitate. Crenshaw's smile widened. "We'll be back," he said finally, "and next time we might not ask so polite." As the riders turned and headed back the way they came, Thaddeus realized he'd just made enemies of very dangerous men, all for 10 strangers who meant nothing to him, or so he kept telling himself. The barn was dead silent when Thaddeus pushed open the heavy wooden door. 10 pairs of eyes stared at him from the shadows, wide with fear and something that might have been hope. Li Wei stepped forward first, as she always seemed to do. "They gone?" she whispered. "For now." Thaddeus set his rifle against a hay bale and studied the women properly for the first time. They were younger than he'd initially thought, some barely out of childhood. Their clothes were torn silk and cotton, once beautiful but now stained with dirt and worse things. These weren't just workers who'd escaped poor conditions. These were girls who'd been stolen from their lives. "Tell me about the mine," he said quietly. Li Wei's hands trembled as she spoke. "Not mine. They say mine, but..." She struggled with the English, then switched tactics. "They bring us from China, promise good work, good life. But when we arrive," her voice broke, "they lock us up, make us work in house where men come, pay money to..." She couldn't finish. Thaddeus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd heard stories about places like that, but hearing it from someone who'd lived it was different. These weren't just escaped workers. They were survivors of something unspeakable. "How did you get away?" "Fire," said one of the other women, speaking for the first time. She was older, maybe 30, with scars on her wrists that told their own story. "Kitchen fire. Guards run to save building. We run to save ourselves." "How long ago?" 3 days, Li Wei answered. "We walk, hide during day. They follow with dogs, with horses. We think maybe we safe now, but they found you anyway." Thaddeus ran a hand through his graying hair. He'd thought he was done with other people's wars, but fate seemed determined to drag him back into the fight. One of the youngest women said something in Chinese, and Li Wei translated. "She asked if you turn us away now, if you give us to bad men." Thaddeus looked at each face in turn. In their eyes, he saw something he recognized. The same look Margaret had given him the night before the attack, when she'd begged him to take their family somewhere safe. He'd promised her they were safe on their own land. He'd been wrong. "What's your name?" he asked Li Wei. "Li Wei. It mean beautiful rose." "Well, Li Wei," he said slowly. "Those men who were here, I recognize their type. Hell, I recognize their leader. Name's Crenshaw. He's been running girls and guns through this territory for years. Law's never been able to touch him because he's got protection in high places." Li Wei's face went pale. "You know him." "I know him." Thaddeus's voice went cold and hard. "See, 3 years ago, Crenshaw and his boys hit a farm about 10 miles south of here, burned it to the ground, killed everyone inside." He paused, the words catching in his throat. "That farm was mine. Those people were my wife and daughter." The barn fell silent except for the sound of wind through the wooden slats. Li Wei stared at him with dawning understanding. "Now he's back," Thaddeus continued, "and he's got you, which means I've got a choice to make." But deep down, he already knew what that choice would be. As the sun began to set, painting the sky the color of dried blood, Thaddeus found himself doing something he hadn't done in 3 years, preparing his home for guests. The women had taken shelter in his kitchen, moving quietly like ghosts afraid of disturbing the living. Li Wei worked alongside him, helping to distribute what little food he had. She moved with practiced efficiency, rationing portions so everyone would get something. It was clear she'd been taking care of the others since their escape. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly as they worked. "We can leave, find somewhere else." "Where?" Thaddeus asked, not looking up from the pot of beans he was stirring. "Crenshaw knows this territory better than anyone. He's got men in every town, contacts at every way station. You run now. He'll have you back in chains before morning. Then we stay and bring trouble to you." "Trouble's already here." He finally met her eyes. "Has been for 3 years. Maybe it's time I stopped running from it." One of the younger women approached hesitantly, holding out a small bundle wrapped in silk. When she unfolded it, Thaddeus saw a tiny carved jade dragon, no bigger than his thumb. The girl spoke softly in Chinese. "She says, 'Thank you,'" Li Wei translated. "This dragon belonged to her grandmother. It's all she has left from home. She wants you to have it." Thaddeus stared at the small carving, seeing how the girl's hands shook as she offered her most precious possession to a stranger. "Tell her to keep it," he said gruffly. "Tell her she'll need it to remember where she came from when this is all over." But the girl pressed it into his palm anyway, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. For a moment, Thaddeus felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built brick by brick since Margaret's death. As night fell completely, he positioned the women throughout the house, some in the root cellar, others in the attic, Li Wei and 2 others in the main room where he could keep watch. He'd learned from his mistakes. This time he wouldn't leave anyone unprotected. "Tell me about your home," he said to Li Wei as they sat by the dying fire. "In China." Her face softened. "Small village. My father was teacher. We had garden with real roses, not like my name but actual flowers. My mother, she make best dumplings in village." She smiled sadly. "They save money for 2 years to send me to America. They think I get good job, send money back." "How long since you've seen them?" 8 months. "They think I'm working in factory, making clothes. They think I'm safe." She wiped away a tear. "They never know what really happened." Thaddeus thought about his own parents, long dead, and how they'd never know what happened to their son either. How he'd let his family die while he was off checking fence lines. How he'd become a bitter, broken man who shot at strangers instead of helping them. "If you were there now," he said quietly, "in your father's garden, what would you tell him?" Li Wei considered this. "I tell him America, not what we thought. But also, I tell him I meet man who remember what kindness is, even when world try to make him forget." Outside something moved in the darkness, moved in the yo. Thaddeus reached for his rifle, motioning for Li Wei to wake the others silently. Through the window, he could see the orange glow of torches moving across his property. Crenshaw had returned, and this time, he hadn't come alone. "How many men does he usually travel with?" Thaddeus whispered. Li Wei's face went white as she peered through the window. "More than before. Many more." The torches spread out in a wide circle around the house. They were surrounded. "If you were Thaddeus, what would you do? Fight knowing you're outnumbered and risk getting everyone killed? Or surrender the women to save your own life? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you'd choose." Because what Thaddeus decided next would determine whether any of them would see another sunrise. Thaddeus made his choice the moment he saw Li Wei's terrified face in the firelight. He'd failed to protect his family once. He wouldn't fail again. "Get them to the root cellar," he whispered urgently. "All of them. There's a tunnel that leads to the old well house. My grandfather dug it during the Indian Wars. If things go bad, you take them and run." "What about you?" Li Wei asked, though she was already gathering the other women. "I'm going to give Crenshaw what he's really here for." Thaddeus checked his rifle and pistol, then grabbed 2 more guns from his cabinet. "Me." The front door exploded inward just as the last woman disappeared into the cellar. Crenshaw strode in with 4 armed men, his scarred face twisted in a cold smile. But his expression changed when he saw Thaddeus standing alone in the middle of the room, weapons at his sides but not raised. "Well, well," Crenshaw drawled. "Thaddeus Whitmore. Should have known a stubborn bastard like you would be involved." He looked around the empty room. "Where are they?" "Gone," Thaddeus lied smoothly. "Left an hour ago. Headed north toward the railroad." Crenshaw's laugh was like broken glass. "You always were a terrible liar, Thaddeus. Remember when we were kids? You couldn't even lie about stealing apples from old Henderson's orchard." The words hit Thaddeus like a physical blow. He stared at Crenshaw's face. really looked at it for the first time, seeing past the scars and the years of hard living. Billy? Billy Crenshaw? Been a long time, hasn't it? Billy's smile widened, showing teeth yellowed by tobacco and cruelty. Last time I saw you, you were crying over your daddy's grave. Swore you'd make something of yourself. Make him proud. He gestured around the modest house. How'd that work out for you? Thaddeus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Billy Crenshaw had been his childhood friend, the boy who'd taught him to fish and hunt, the same boy who'd stood beside him at his father's funeral and promised they'd always look out for each other. You killed Margaret, Thaddeus said, his voice barely a whisper. You killed Emma. Business is business. Billy shrugged like he was discussing the weather. Your farm was in the way of a very profitable smuggling route. Nothing personal. Nothing personal? Thaddeus's hand moved toward his gun, but Billy's men were faster, their weapons already trained on him. Now, Billy said, wagging a finger. Let's not do anything stupid. See, I've got a proposition for you. Those girls are worth a lot of money to certain people. You help me find them, and I'll cut you in for a percentage. Could set you up real nice. Go to hell. Already been there, old friend. Turns out I like it. Billy's expression hardened. But I'm trying to be reasonable here, for old time's sake. Those girls are going back to where they belong, whether you help or not. Question is, do you want to profit from it, or do you want to join your family? From beneath the floorboards came the faintest sound, a woman's cough, quickly stifled. Billy's eyes sharpened like a hawk spotting prey. What was that? He asked softly. Thaddeus knew his time was up, but in that moment he thought of Leeway's jade dragon in his pocket, of the young girl who'd given him her most precious possession, of 10 women who'd trusted him to keep them safe. That, he said, raising his rifle with lightning speed, was your death warrant. The first shot shattered the oil lamp, plunging the room into chaos. Thaddeus dove behind his overturned table as bullets splintered the wood around him. Billy's men spread out, their muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireflies. Burn him out! Billy shouted from somewhere near the door. But I want those girls alive! Thaddeus rolled to his left. Coming up behind the stone fireplace, his rifle barked twice, and one of Billy's men went down screaming. But there were too many of them, and more torches were moving outside. He could hear glass breaking as they smashed his windows. The smell of smoke began to fill the room. From the cellar came muffled sounds. The women were moving through the tunnel, Leeway getting them to safety like he'd told her. Good. At least if he died here, it wouldn't be for nothing. A shadow moved past the broken window. Thaddeus put a bullet through it and heard a man curse in pain. But his position was becoming untenable as flames began to lick at the curtains. You know how this ends. Thaddeus, Billy called out. Same way it ended for Margaret and little Emma, only this time you get to watch. Something white-hot and murderous exploded in Thaddeus's chest. He'd spent 3 years drowning in grief and self-pity, but now all of that was burning away, leaving only pure, crystalline rage. Billy wanted to finish what he'd started 3 years ago. Fine. But this time, Thaddeus wouldn't go down easy. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey from his shelf, stuffed a rag into it, and lit it with a burning curtain. The improvised bomb sailed through the front window and exploded among Billy's men outside. Screams and cursing filled the night air. Using the distraction, Thaddeus sprinted for the back door, reloading on the run. But Billy was waiting for him in the kitchen, gun drawn. Hello, old friend, Billy said softly. They fired simultaneously. Billy's shot went wide as Thaddeus tackled him, both men crashing through the kitchen table. They rolled across the floor, each trying to bring their weapons to bear. Billy was younger and meaner, but Thaddeus was fighting for something bigger than himself now. Billy's pistol came up toward Thaddeus's face. Thaddeus caught his wrist, and they struggled for control of the weapon. It discharged into the ceiling, sending splinters raining down on them. You always were too soft, Billy gasped, his scarred face inches from Thaddeus's. That's why your family died. That's why these girls are going to die, because you're too weak to do what needs doing. Maybe, Thaddeus grunted, slowly turning the gun toward Billy's chest. But I'm strong enough to do this. The shot was muffled by Billy's body. His eyes went wide with surprise, then slowly went dark. Thaddeus rolled away from the corpse of his childhood friend, breathing hard. But the fight wasn't over. Shouts outside told him Billy's remaining men were regrouping. Thaddeus grabbed Billy's gun and extra ammunition, then slipped out the back door into the darkness. The house was fully ablaze now, lighting up the night sky. But in the orange glow, Thaddeus could see the old well house where the tunnel emerged. No sign of the women. Li Wei had gotten them clear. 3 men came around the corner of the burning house, silhouetted against the flames. Thaddeus stepped out of the shadows like an avenging spirit. "Looking for someone?" he asked. By the time the sun rose over the smoking ruins of his home, it was over. 6 bodies lay scattered around the property, and Thaddeus sat on what remained of his porch steps, bleeding from a dozen wounds but alive. Li Wei emerged from the well house cautiously, the other women behind her. When she saw him sitting there, she ran to his side. "You're hurt," she said, examining a bullet graze on his arm. "I'll live." He looked at his destroyed home, then at the women who were alive because of it. Question is, what happens now? 3 months later, the sound of laughter echoed across the valley where Thaddeus Whitmore's house once stood. But now, instead of one lonely structure, a small community had grown up around the old well house and barn. Thaddeus wiped sweat from his forehead as he helped Li Wei hang laundry on the line they'd strung between 2 oak trees. The other women worked in the garden they'd planted together, their voices mixing Chinese and English as they shared stories and jokes he was slowly learning to understand. "The new house is coming along well," Li Wei said, nodding toward the frame structure that was taking shape where his old home had burned. "Should be finished before winter." "Should be," Thaddeus agreed, "though I still say we're building it too big." Li Wei smiled. 10 women need room, and you need room too. "I meant what I told you that first night," he said quietly. "When this is all settled, if any of you want to leave, want to try to get back to China or find family elsewhere, I'll help. I've got some money saved and—" "Thaddeus." Li Wei placed her hand over his, stopping his words. "We talk about this. All of us. Where we go now. This is home." He looked around at what they'd built together. Mei Lin, who'd given him the jade dragon, was teaching English to the younger girls using a primer they'd ordered from town. Jun, the woman with scars on her wrists, had turned out to be an incredible cook and was preparing lunch over the outdoor fire. Even Shu, the youngest at barely 16, was helping to build furniture with tools Thaddeus had taught her to use. The sheriff had come by twice in the past month, asking questions about the burned house and the dead men found on the property. But when he saw the women working peacefully, saw the crops growing and the community thriving, his questions became less pointed. Word had spread about what kind of men Crenshaw and his gang really were. No one was mourning their loss. "There's something I want to show you," Li Wei said, producing a folded piece of paper from her apron pocket. "Letter came yesterday." Thaddeus unfolded it carefully. The writing was in Chinese, but Li Wei had written a translation underneath in her careful English script. "Dearest Wei, your mother and I received your letter with great joy. We are proud of your new life in America and the family you have found there. The man you write about sounds honorable. Send him our gratitude for protecting our daughter. Your father says if we were younger we would come to America ourselves to shake his hand. We are sending seeds from our garden. Plant roses for us. Love, Father." Thaddeus stared at the letter, feeling something warm spread through his chest. "You told them about me?" "I told them about all of us. About how 10 scared women found shelter with a good man. About how that man found family when he thought he would always be alone." That evening, as they sat around the fire sharing their simple meal, Thaddeus looked at each face illuminated by the dancing flames. Li Wei teaching young Shu a new English word. Jun, humming a song from her childhood while she mended clothes. Mei Lin carefully tending the small jade dragon that now sat in a place of honor on their makeshift mantelpiece. 3 years ago, he'd been a man consumed by loss, anger, and isolation. He'd thought his story ended the night his family died, but sometimes the end of one story was just the beginning of another. "Tomorrow," he announced, "we start building the chicken coop." The women groaned in mock protest, but their laughter carried across the valley like music. And for the first time since Margaret's death, Thaddeus Whitmore smiled and meant it. In his pocket, he carried 2 things always: a faded photograph of his first family, and a small jade dragon that reminded him you could build a new family from the most unlikely beginnings. Both were precious. Both were home. The rancher who once hated outsiders had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the people who need shelter the most are the ones who end up giving you a home. If you enjoyed the story, consider sending a super chat to help bring more stories like this. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with an ending so surprising you won't forget it anytime soon. Click on the video now.